Traditionally, it was expected that the elementary school curriculum would provide basic literacies and prepare children for high school. University or college attendance would in many cases follow. This raises the question, is the BC school curriculum preparing our students for the real world as well as higher education? What skills and experiences, including those not measured by standardized tests, might our students need to develop and be ready for a complex world? What commitments have been made to ensure we are educating well-rounded students? What more can be done? How can parents help their children get a head start on making school a meaningful experience? On today's program, we talk about how imaginative education, a British Columbian innovation that is going around the globe, can contribute to a truly successful school learning experience and meet these objectives right here at home. I'm Paul Shaker, and this is An Education Matter. On our program today is SFU Education Professor and Director of the Imaginative Education Research Group, Kieran Egan. Also joining us is Gillian Judson, an SFU doctoral student and researcher as well as a teacher. She works in the Imaginative Education Research Group as well. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kieran, as you think about BC curriculum and the state of it over your many years here in BC, why did you develop this idea that imaginative education would be a reform that we should promote here in BC?
Oh, I think it's not even just BC, of course, but everywhere in the galaxy. I think we have the same kind of problem with children. That is, not the problem with children, but the way we treat children. That we tend to be concerned about, covering the curriculum, getting the materials across, and maybe spend a little too little time on focusing on how that stuff is made meaningful to the kids. So what we've been focusing mainly is how do you make the content of the material not just meaningful to the kids, but emotionally engaging and exciting, because one of the basic principles we work with is that everything is wonderful. And if you look in most classrooms, you really don't get a sense that everything's wonderful, that somehow a lot of material is just being covered for the sake of. It's very hard to work out. Some people are not quite sure why they're doing it, but we've got this curriculum that's been in place for a long time with very little sense of just what's so exciting about it, why it matters so much to kids.
So meaning and emotional engagement are at the root of the work you're doing, trying to have the student experience the school curriculum in a sense of meaning, personal meaning to them, and enlightening them along lines of personal emotional engagement. So why imagination? Why does imagination contribute to these factors?
Well, the imagination is the ability to think of something as possible. And what we're focusing on is trying to get kids to see the content of the curriculum not just as a bunch of facts that they've got to learn that go on forever, which is the way I think a kid in grade 2 or 3 sees the textbooks disappearing over the horizon that they've got to somehow get through, but rather to see this as a great adventure. It's the adventure of discovering the wonders of the world around them. And I think we pay too little attention to that. And it's not some exotic feature of what we do in education. It's not a matter of teaching them the hard stuff and then maybe in the 10 minutes that's remaining getting their imaginations going, but rather making it clear to everybody in the education system that the imagination is the great workhorse of learning. And that workhorse is what we want to see being used much more in classrooms.
Gillian, you're close to this. You've recently been a teacher in the Lower Mainland. Could you talk a little bit about how you see your work as a researcher now infusing imagination, meaning, and emotional engagement into the curriculum for students?
Absolutely. I think from my experience as a teacher prior to studying imaginative education, I was trained to think about how to teach a topic by beginning with what I wanted to fulfill, what objective I wanted to fulfill, and then deciding what steps I would do in order to fulfill this objective. But what results is often quite a boring approach to teaching a topic. Instead, what we want to do is think about what is emotionally engaging, what is the significance, the emotional significance of the topic, and start from there. So when we're teaching any kind of a topic, whether it was the grammatical structures of French that I was working with. We begin with what is emotionally significant about this, and from there we can think that we can engage our students' imaginations in anything we're teaching.
Well, Kieran, this flies in the face of some of the traditional ideas about education that you could summarize as saying it doesn't matter what you study so long as you don't like it. I take it that you do want students to like learning and like being in school.
Oh yeah, and the trouble is, you know, those traditional ideas, as you well know, are driven by approaches to education that have been industrialized almost. You know, if you think of the dominant form of planning that every teacher is taught in schools of education, they all are taught to start with their objectives and work out what their methods are going to be, then choose the content, and then have their evaluation procedures. And this is taken from Ralph Tyler's work, as you know, in the 1949. And that was derived from studies of how to build refrigerators and motor cars most efficiently, because that's what you do. You start with your plan for the motor car or refrigerator, then the content, the materials you're going to use, and then the methods you're going to use to build them on the assembly line, and then what in industry is called quality control, which we call evaluation. So what happened was that they took over from what seemed to be the most successful industrial procedures and taught teachers to use these to be more efficient. But it's never seemed to me obvious that the dominant method you should use in training teachers to plan their lessons should be taken from building refrigerators. So we've been interested in other forms like storytelling. You know, when you tell a story, you look for what is, you know, particularly a non-fictional story, where the newspaper editor will say to the journalist, get me the story on the fire downtown. They're not asking for a fiction. They're asking you to find out what's emotionally meaningful, what are the facts, and bring them across with as much emotional impact as possible for the readers. So we're just saying, look, you can do this with everything we teach, you know, that interior opposite angles are congruent, similarly has important, some wonderful factual material that can be made riveting to the students if only you approach it properly. If you think of it as teaching as storytelling, as it were, rather than teaching as building refrigerators. So that's, in a sense, the kind of change we want to infuse throughout the education system.
Now, these practices you talk about, and I've heard you refer to them as tools, are based on a psychological theory. They're not simply somebody concocting them out of the air. Is that correct?
Yes, oh yes, yes. We've got theories coming out our ears. Yeah. And indeed, what I've been doing particularly is drawing on theories like Vygotsky's, and we've been articulating our own theories in the group, and I've written a number of books over the years that have now appeared in about a dozen different languages. All of these create a way of thinking about education that then delivers to the classroom teacher a set of what we're calling learning tools or cognitive tools that each teacher can use in everyday teaching in the everyday classroom. So indeed it is theoretically founded, and I think fairly well founded. It's just that it's, unlike many educational theories, it also has very straightforward practical implications that we're interested in elaborating for teachers throughout the province.
Now, Gillian, I'm sure you were a successful teacher before you came to study imaginative education, but now when you look back on your teaching, you probably have insights into why certain things worked. Would that be true to say?
I think that when teachers look at this theory, they might initially say, I do some of these things, and they may also say, and when I'm doing these sorts of things, that's when my students are most engaged in learning. So imagination was something that I, like most teachers, aimed to use periodically with students. This is an imaginative activity. Then we'll get back to the grammar. Now I can see that it can actually infuse the entire process.
So narrative and storytelling is an example that Kieran gave. Are there others that come to mind that suit your personal style of teaching?
Mental imagery, evoking vivid mental images with students as they're learning, creating characters out of something like a punctuation mark so they can understand the meaning in a narrated or story-like way, telling what's the story on the comma or the period, for example, and then helping students visualize this item and the role it plays in their lives, more than just a mark on a page. So yes, there's many, many tools, and they're not something contrived, as we just said, but they're part of our culture.
And they're based on a fundamental change in the way we approach instruction, I guess, that it should engage interest, enthusiasm, emotion, all these things from the ground up, because it will result in greater learning.
Absolutely, because when our emotions are engaged, that's when our imaginations are engaged. And the imagination is what makes anything an educational activity.
Again, it sounds like a change, Kieran, from the education I studied in history of education.
Well, we all spent most of our time in schools also bored out of our minds. I mean, I don't know about your experience. And even if you're going to good classrooms, you know, I've spent some time while I've been at Simon Fraser going around occasionally with our faculty associates and sitting in the back of what are good classrooms. But when you actually look at each individual child, most of the time they're waiting for something to happen, or they're bored out of their tree, and they're not the focus of, you know, whatever happens to be going on. So for most of the time, most kids are bored in school. And this is not, there's no reason we should be doing this. It's a cruel and unusual punishment, and unnecessary. It's created by a lack of imagination, and that's, again, what we're hoping to cure.
I did want to talk a little bit about the differences among students and whether this program of imaginative education helps us get at exceptionalities on both ends of the spectrum. Gillian, do you have an idea that this would help you with the range of students more than the traditional teaching methods that you were originally accustomed to?
I would say it's much more suitable for the individual, the unique traits of each child, because every child comes with emotion and imagination. And by teaching in ways that engage them, you're allowing them much more flexibility in how they're learning. And you allow them, as any good teacher would, many ways to express their learning. So by making most learning experiences, or all learning experiences, shaped around their emotional and imaginative engagement, you're going to reach far more students in the classroom.
I'm wondering about negative emotions and whether there's a place for them in imaginative education.
Right, well, the kind of emotion we'd want to shape a topic around would be one that would engage students in a positive way, but we would also not deny the fact that within the stories of what we're telling, within our teaching about revolution, we're dealing with greed, we're dealing with violence, we're dealing with fear, but we're also dealing with victory and freedom and a lot of positive emotions, too.
Thank you. Stay tuned.
For more than 40 years, the Faculty of Education at SFU has been delivering academic programs that are innovative and responsive. Based on the academic research of our professors and the expertise of practicing teachers from your communities, our programs are designed to meet classroom needs. As a community, we're piecing together a successful education experience for students today and in the future.
Welcome back. We're discussing imaginative education with Kieran Egan and Gillian Judson. Kieran, where in the school curriculum do you see imaginative education as particularly applying?
Well, it's a bit like saying, you know, I have to fly from Vancouver to Chicago, and where do you think in the journey we most should use the airplane? You know, that is, it's an integral part of what you're doing. And I think the use of the imagination, again, is the great workhorse of learning. So whenever we fail to call on the student's imagination, then we're doing something a bit stupid. So as far as I can see, everywhere, all the time, we should be engaging the student's imagination. Now that might seem, doesn't mean that the kids have got to be popping with, you know, the neurons popping all the time. It just means that they've got to find whatever they're doing meaningful. That doesn't seem too hard a request to make of a system that's costing us a fortune.
Gillian, you've taught a range of subjects. Do you feel that imaginative education enters into these various teaching environments that you have been teacher in?
I would say it applies to any topic whatsoever, from textiles to science, mathematics, French second language.
And if people want to know more about imaginative education, I guess there's a variety of ways to do this. For example, as you say, there are a number of books you have been author and co-author of.
And Gillian has just edited a book that's just come out recently as well. What's it called?
Teaching 360 Degrees.
All right.
Yeah. Imagination in the
Very
curriculum.
good. And the publisher?
Sense Publishers.
All right. And there are conferences?
Yes, we have a conference every year in Vancouver, and in the half years now, as you know, we had one in Canberra in Australia in January, and we will be having one in February in Barcelona, and the year after that there will be one in Jerusalem in January or February. So we'll be having one every year in Vancouver, and then somewhere around the world they'll be having 1.5 years.
And to find out all about this, there's a website, no doubt.
There is. www.IERG, for Imaginative Education Research Group, .net. So www.IERG.net.
So these ideas really have been traveling around the world, haven't they?
Yes, yeah, well, they've been getting around a fair amount.
There's actual schools in various other countries that are implementing the ideas.
We've got a number of teachers and schools, and for a number of years actually, particularly strangely enough, well, there's places where they have big private schools are the ones who are most easily able to adapt these things and adopt them. So in places like Australia in particular, for example, some of the big private schools have been using them for a while. And in Hawaii, and Punahou School, for example, there's a number of people there using these ideas. And it's when you get to the big public school systems that it's harder to implement significant changes because there's so many stakeholders, I guess. But we've got teachers all over the place who are using these in their individual classrooms. So there's something happening around the place.
In various European countries?
Yes, yeah, strangely enough, I don't know why, but Romania seems to be going gangbusters on this, and that they've translated about 4 of my books in the last year, and they've got the stuff going in schools all over the place. So that's all very encouraging. And, a number of other countries around Europe and South America. And so we've got groups of academics as well who are affiliated to our group who are trying to work out ways to get these things implemented in their local school systems. Our problem is not being able to respond to all the requests we're getting for advice, help, support, etc.
Well, this begs the question, I guess, of what would it take to implement imaginative education more in BC, whether it requires some sort of a fundamental change that's very costly or that is somehow stopping us from proceeding with the implementation of it. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, there are 2 things to change. One is the methods of teaching, and the individual teachers can do that. They close the door and they can do what they want, basically, as long as they cover the material and make sure that the kids learn the stuff and do well on the test. And then lots of teachers are using that and finding, a little to their surprise, that something that's called imaginative education actually works a great deal better at getting kids to learn this stuff and pass tests with vim and vigor. And the other side of it is the curriculum itself. And that's harder to change. You've got to get lots of administrators making decisions. Everybody's worried about what everybody else will say, so that is a very much more complicated process. But that's a part of what we are also proposing, that we have quite significant changes to be made to the curriculum as well.
As a teacher, Gillian, as a recent teacher, do you agree that it wouldn't take drastic change to see imaginative education introduced across BC?
I think it would take very little, actually. If the teacher begins by taking a topic, they generally teach maybe with a worksheet and some basic instruction on the board. Let's take a verb tense, the future tense in French, and stop and say, what is amazing about a verb tense? Well, it can transport us in time. And I'm going to teach my students about it as a transporter in time, what verb tenses allow us. And they can begin simply by deciding for themselves what's significant about the topic and changing it in their classroom.
I once was guiding a student teacher who was teaching English literature, and she took it to be central to the teaching of poetry, the birth dates and death dates of the poets, which in itself isn't a bad idea, but she never seemed to get around to the emotion that was in the poems, and that was kind of amazing to me that I had to point that out to her. Some people might say that this isn't practical enough, that it's not preparing students for the real world. We certainly have an economic driver behind much of society's investment in education. What do you say to people that say making students feel good and having them be interested is all well and good, but it doesn't get to the heart of what we have schools for?
Well, I'd say that's absolute nonsense. We're doing exactly that. That is, we're trying to show in the most practical way possible how you get children to learn. What we're, I think, not doing very well at the moment is achieving that. If you look at the results of what kids know at the end of grade 12 in every place in the galaxy, virtually, it's appalling. They know pitifully little of what they have been taught for 12 years. So, somebody who comes along and says this is eye in the sky or pie in the sky is clearly missing the central practicality of it, that it's designed as a very practical way of actually achieving what we want schools to achieve, that is, get children learning lots of things about the world, finding the world interesting, and making them into self-motivated learners. We have one little program we're playing at the moment, for example, you might be interested in, called Learning in Depth. And this is a simple thing that we want to suggest that what kids should do when they come to school. In the first week, we randomly give them a topic like apples or the railroad or something. And they then study that for the next 12 years. They do the usual curriculum, but they take maybe half an hour a week or so and do a little bit of work on that. So by the time every child in BC, for example, would finish their schooling, each child would know as much as anybody on earth about something. Now that would be very cheap to implement, but very practically designed to make sure they learned a great deal about something, but it also would transform their understanding of the nature of knowledge, and it would transform their approach to many of the other things that go on in the schooling. Something like that is practical, simple, cheap, but would have a transformative effect on children's education in British Columbia. That's just one of, we've got a dozen of these we could describe.
I know that we have a neuroscience lab in the building, which in the same spirit as Vygotsky's scientific psychological studies tries to look deeply into the way the mind functions and reaffirms the kind of principles that you're speaking of. These things, as I had said earlier in the program, are not simply developed de novo from our minds, but also have roots in empirical research that goes on at our university and at other universities here and, in Vygotsky's case, long ago and far away. Gillian, you have some ideas too, I think, about parents and how they can apply imaginative education to the child-rearing practices that are present in the home. Would you care to comment?
Absolutely. I think first it's important to say that it's not about learning principles and bringing them into the home, because imagination surrounds us on all sides. We are emotionally and imaginatively engaged through things like story that are a central part of our culture. When we're playing with our children, when we're doing rhymes and clapping and talking about images and stories, we're engaging their emotions, we're engaging their imagination. So as parents, we continue to do what we consider only play, because in fact we're equipping them for more stronger, deeper intellectual growth.
And Kieran, you as well as Gillian are a parent yourself. Did you implement these ideas in your own child-rearing practices?
No, I learned them from my children. They're now a grandparent 3 times over, just the other day, I should add. And mainly, it was a combination of... I spent a lot of time looking at things like Archie comics. Our kids were reading Archie comics when they were 11. I thought, what the hell are they reading? These things are stupid. There's something bizarre. And so I was interested in what was engaging them about that kind of thing and the kinds of games they played. And so I was interested in, and then remembering my own experience. I was awful at school. I couldn't understand why I was there. It never made a lot of sense to me. So it's a combination of looking at my own experience and particularly what engaged our children and why they were engaged by certain things. And I think that gradually led to a way of thinking about how can you make these things that are genuinely interesting to kids, the principles that underlie them also underlie the fact that alternate interior angles are congruent and all the other things that we teach them in mathematics and science and history. So the trick was to try to work out how did you bring those qualities of the material, the content, the curriculum content out in a way that would engage the children in the same way that Archie comics were engaging kids. It's not that hard. It's just that we have been trained to think of this industrial model of schooling, I think, have all led us to thinking about school in a way that is counterproductive to actually engaging kids' imaginations and learning. That's my sermon for the day.
We'll be right back.
For more than 40 years, the Faculty of Education at SFU has been delivering academic programs that are innovative and responsive. Based on the academic research of our professors and the expertise of practicing teachers from your communities, our programs are designed to meet classroom needs. As a community, we're piecing together a successful education experience for students today and in the future.
This program marks 1 year in the life of Your Education Matters and is an appropriate moment to reflect on our achievements to date. Our overarching purpose in bringing you Your Education Matters has been to provide voices we felt were missing from the media discussion of education in British Columbia. These voices could be summarized under the name professional educators. Nearly all our guests have fit this designation, although their roles vary from teacher to university president to professors and heads of education stakeholder groups. What links them together? After these many discussions, several characteristics stand out. There is an appreciation of the complexity of providing a quality education for each individual we serve. There are no silver bullets or magic pills in education. A holistic, humane view of people emerges, characterized by a compassion and sensitivity to preparing students for all of life, not just the economic aspects. Openness to the ideas of others and a commitment to dialogue and reflection are other traits our guests have demonstrated. The stakes are too high in education and the challenges are too challenging for us to indulge in arrogance or intransigence. Finally, the many educators with whom we have spoken exude a sense of purpose about their work, and that purpose is about service, not profit. It is about meaning, not markets. We are well advised to remember that educators, like other human service professionals and workers in a variety of fields, are called to a vocation. We all benefit from the service to others, commitment to community, and pursuit of ideals that characterize the best among us. Thanks for tuning in to Your Education Matters.
For more information about this show or to view past episodes, go to the Your Education Matters website at www.youreducationmatters.ca. The views and opinions presented in this program are not necessarily those of all faculties, staff, or administration at SFU.